Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. The Epstein Files should be public within 30 days. President Trump signs a new law ordering their release.
A Florida congresswoman is indicted, accused of stealing $5 million in FEMA funds and using it to boost her 2021 campaign.
House lawmakers repeal a law that would allow senators to profit from the DOJ secretly searching their phone records. It unanimously passed the House, but it may stall in the Senate.
First Lady Melania Trump and Second Lady Usha Vance make a rare joint visit to a Marine base, thanking soldiers and their families ahead of Thanksgiving.
Federal agents say they've dismantled a major meth pipeline from Mexico to Colorado. And the Coast Guard says it's made a record drug seizure. The latest on the government's fight against cartels.
And this giving season, we have a practical and uplifting guide to help Americans maximize the impact of their charitable giving, emotionally, socially, and financially, while staying tax smart and intentional.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Today's Thursday, November 20th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, an update on the Jeffrey Epstein files. President Trump has signed into law a bill to release the documents surrounding the deceased sex offender. The Epstein Files Transparency Act orders the Department of Justice to release all unclassified records or documents tied to Epstein in a searchable and downloadable format. The release must come no later than 30 days following the bill's enactment. The measure prohibits the Justice Department from withholding or redacting records for political reasons or to protect someone's reputation.
After signing the bill, Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, Jeffrey Epstein was a lifelong Democrat, donated thousands of dollars to Democrat politicians, and was deeply associated with many well-known Democrat figures.
Meanwhile, Harvard President Larry Summers is taking leave from the university and has resigned from the OpenAI board. This follows newly released emails showing he stayed in contact with Epstein years after Epstein's 2008 conviction. A Florida congresswoman is facing federal charges over what prosecutors say was a $5 million scheme involving disaster relief funds. Representative Sheila Sherfilis McCormick and 3 others were indicted in Miami.
She's accused of stealing FEMA overpayments sent to Trinity Healthcare Services in 2021 when she served as the company's CEO.
The Justice Department says the funds were tied to a FEMA-backed COVID vaccination staffing contract and were never returned after the overpayment was flagged. Officials also accused the congresswoman of routing money through friends and family to make straw donation contributions.
Prosecutors allege the group laundered the money, moved it through multiple accounts, and used a substantial portion to support her special election campaign. Attorney General Mamdani called the misuse of disaster funds, quote, selfish. FBI Director Kash Patel reacted, saying no one is above the law.
Sherfilis McCormick faces up to 53 years in prison if convicted. Her brother and two co-defendants also face significant penalties. Lawmakers are under the microscope for allowing a provision to sneak into the government funding bill that could enrich some senators for alleged DOJ misconduct. NTD's Melina Wisecup is here to break down what this all means. Melina, good morning. This is related to a new discovery that the DOJ under President Biden searched Republicans' phone records without them knowing. What does this new House action do?
Right. There's a lot to unpack here, but essentially, after it was revealed by the Republican Senator Chuck Grassley last month that while former special counsel Jack Smith was investigating Republicans' response to the 2020 election, he allegedly secretly searched the phones of 10 Republican senators. Now, Steph, why this relates to the recently passed funding bill that you mentioned is that senators, when they crafted the bill, someone, we don't know who at this point, but someone put in a provision on the Senate side that would allow senators to sue the federal government for $500,000 for allegedly improperly searching their phones. So after it was brought to light that this new provision would allow senators to profit from this alleged DOJ misconduct on the back of taxpayers, the House moved to overturn it yesterday. It was a unanimous vote in the House, many expressing outrage that they weren't made aware of this new piece when the Senate sent the bill back for the House's final approval.
Now the Senate needs to take it up. Is it likely to pass there?
It's unclear, but it's looking like it won't, at least in its current form. Senate Majority Leader John Thune previously defended the new provision, saying that it will strengthen government accountability. Listen to Thune.
We strengthen that provision when it comes to allowing a federal government agency, the Justice Department in this case, to collect information, private information on individual senators. We think that's a violation of separation of powers under the Constitution. Obviously, Jack Smith violated the law in the way he went about that. This is something that needed to be addressed.
So many of the senators whose phones were allegedly secretly searched have said that they would sue the government, but some have said they wouldn't sue for monetary damages, except Senator Lindsey Graham. This is what he said about it.
Oh, it's far more than that. Why do you pick? You want to make sure that people who are going to issue subpoenas in the future against private citizens to get their phone records without a court order, without a warrant, have to think twice. And if the government doesn't pay, you're going to get more of this. So the only way you're going to prevent this in the future is for somebody to be held liable and the government pay.
Right, so we'll be watching how Congress navigates balancing, ensuring upholding rights of the lawmakers there to their privacy, but also the ethical use of public funds, and who actually put that provision into the bill. Melina, also on Capitol Hill today, the Congressional Executive Commission on China will hold a hearing about religious freedom. Tell us what to expect there.
Right, Steph. This hearing to start at 9:30 is going to probe the Chinese Communist Party's attack on religious freedom. But the key here is that lawmakers are aiming to expose why Americans should care. Their point is to make clear why it's not an over there issue in China. Some witnesses will focus on the transnational repression side. For example, Chinese Americans who have family back in China who could be pressured to keep silent here in America on certain issues at the command of the CCP, or else their family back in China could be at risk. Or the more than 190 violent threats against Falun Gong adherents, that spiritual discipline that's practiced around the world, and it's not limited to Chinese diaspora. In 2022, the Chinese leader Xi Jinping escalated attempts to eradicate this meditation practice with a special focus on the United States. So all of this will be key throughout today's hearing that starts at 9:30. Check back with us at that time, and we'll have a recap for you.
We sure will. Thank you so much for the update, NTD congressional correspondent Melina Weiskup. And federal authorities in Colorado say they've shut down a cartel-linked drug operation that moved massive quantities of drugs into the state, seizing more than 1,000 pounds of methamphetamine.
Meanwhile, the Coast Guard says it's made its largest single patrol bust in history. Here's more on the federal government's latest actions targeting drug smuggling.
Federal officials yesterday announced they've taken down a major drug pipeline running from Mexico into Colorado. An operation they say moved huge quantities of methamphetamine into the state for years.
This successful investigation boasts the largest methamphetamine seizure in Colorado history and took more than 1,000 pounds of methamphetamine off of the streets before it could be distributed into our community.
Officials say the 2-year investigation uncovered ties between local networks in Denver and cartel networks in Mexico.
The investigation had ties to other DEA investigations domestically, but also to elements in Mexico involving both the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels, both of which were designated as foreign terrorist organizations earlier this year.
Federal authorities say the case led to 15 indictments. According to the affidavit, most of the drugs were hidden inside boxes of imported produce. Officials say they believe that 4 alleged members of the ring, including its suspected leader, remain free in Mexico. The rest now face federal charges that could lead to decades behind bars. And while Colorado investigators were dismantling a land-based pipeline, the U.S. Coast Guard says its crews at sea just delivered one of the biggest drug offloads in American history. A blow aimed directly at the maritime routes cartels rely on. The Coast Guard said yesterday one of its ships offloaded more than 49,000 pounds of cocaine at Port Everglades, calling it the largest cocaine seizure ever recorded in a single patrol. This fiscal year alone, the Coast Guard says it has seized over 230,000 kilograms of cocaine, or nearly 510,000 pounds, the highest on record. DEA leadership told CBS the massive offload shows the pressure being put on global trafficking routes.
We'll continue to keep immense pressure on every trafficking route. We're going to apply every single tool to stop the narcotics of coming into the United States and killing American citizens.
According to federal officials, the combined operations on land and at sea deny cartels more than $500 million in revenue, and they say there's probably more to come.
The Justice Department has announced new charges against former Olympian Ryan James Wedding, who's accused of running a massive transnational drug network. The former snowboarder is now one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
The Department of Justice announced Wednesday that new charges have been unsealed against Ryan Wedding, a former Canadian snowboarder and Olympic athlete now accused of running a massive drug trafficking empire. Authorities are offering a $15 million reward for his capture.
He controls one of the most prolific and violent drug trafficking organizations in this world. He is currently the largest distributor of cocaine in Canada.
Authorities say Wedding's group imports roughly 60 metric tons of cocaine a year into Los Angeles, using semi-trucks from Mexico, moving over $1 billion worth of narcotics across the Americas. So far, 35 people have been indicted, and authorities have seized over 4,000 pounds of drugs, weapons, $3.2 million in cryptocurrency, and $13 million in assets. FBI Director Kash Patel compared Wedding to some of the world's most notorious drug lords.
Ryan Wedding is a modern-day iteration of Pablo Escobar. He's a modern-day iteration of El Chapo Guzman. He is responsible for engineering a narco-trafficking and narco-terrorism program that we have not seen in a long time.
Wedding and 14 defendants, including a Canadian lawyer, are charged with orchestrating the January 2025 murder of a witness who was shot at a restaurant in Colombia. Wedding now faces additional counts including witness tampering and intimidation, murder, money laundering, and drug trafficking.
Ryan Wedding is extremely dangerous. He's extremely violent, and he's extremely wealthy. He's being protected by the Sinaloa cartel, along with others in the country of Mexico. We will find him, and we will bring him to justice.
Law enforcement across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico continue efforts to locate Wedding, who remains among the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives. Christina Corona, NTD News.
5 people in Texas have now pleaded guilty to terrorism-related charges. The case involves an attack linked to Antifa outside a federal immigration detention center. Prosecutors say the group fired gunshots and launched fireworks at the Prairieland Detention Center in July, injuring a police officer who responded.
FBI Director Kash Patel said earlier it's the first time that material support to terrorism charges have been used against the organization, now a designated terror group. Each person convicted faces up to 15 years in federal prison. Cases against others charged in the incident are still ongoing. And attorneys for former FBI Director James Comey appeared before a federal judge in Virginia yesterday. They're requesting a dismissal of what they call a, quote, selective and vindictive prosecution by the Trump administration. NTD's Arlene Richards has more on that story.
Oh, and there's
a member of the first Trump administration has accused his former boss of holding a grudge, one so deep that it led to what his attorneys argue is a selective and vindictive prosecution. Attorneys for former FBI Director James Comey asked Virginia District Court Judge Michael Nachmanoff on Wednesday to dismiss the federal indictment filed against him in September.
Could you raise your right hand, please?
Comey's attorney said the Trump administration was singling out his client because of the president's personal animus toward him. They also claim his testimony was protected speech. The Justice Department charged Comey with making false statements and obstructing a congressional proceeding during testimony he gave before a Senate committee in 2020. They're accusing him of authorizing leaks to the press about FBI investigations. A pressing issue Nachmanoff addressed during the hearing was the claim that the entire grand jury didn't see the full indictment. Comey's attorney had accused the government of altering the indictment after the jury declined to approve one count. U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan was the only attorney that presented before the grand jury. She was in the courtroom on Wednesday, but a different attorney argued on behalf of the government. Nachmanoff questioned Halligan about what the full grand jury saw. She pushed back and directed the judge to the transcript of a back and forth between one juror and the magistrate judge. Comey's attorney asked Nachmanoff to dismiss the case with prejudice, meaning the case cannot be brought for a second time. Nachmanoff said the issues are too wavy and too complex. He said he would not be making a ruling on Wednesday. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And the Washington National Cathedral will be holding a funeral service to honor former Vice President Dick Cheney today. More than 1,000 guests are expected at the invitation-only funeral, including former Presidents George W. Bush and Joe Biden. Former Vice Presidents Kamala Harris, Mike Pence, Al Gore, and Dan Quayle are all expected to pay their respects. Cheney joins a prominent list of American leaders to receive a funeral at the historic church, including Dwight D. Eisenhower, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter.
And still to come, an Afghan teenager in Oklahoma has been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for an ISIS-inspired plot.
How the teen and his co-conspirator planned to carry out the attack on Election Day last year.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is authorizing the export of tens of thousands of advanced semiconductor chips to partners in the Middle East. And Elon Musk and the CEO of NVIDIA say a massive new data center project is underway in Saudi Arabia.
And First Lady Melania Trump and Second Lady Usha Vance make a rare joint visit to a Marine base, thanking soldiers and their families ahead of Thanksgiving. We'll have that and more. Stay with us.
Welcome back. President Trump yesterday spoke at the Saudi Investment Forum to top business and tech executives, touting billions of dollars in financial ties between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia.
He also vows to partner with Middle Eastern countries to work toward peace in Sudan at the request of the Saudi Crown Prince. NTD's Mari Otsu has more from the White House.
The partnership between our two nations is among the most consequential in the entire world, and together the Crown Prince and I are making an alliance stronger and more powerful than it's ever been before.
We are pleased to sign new agreements and investment projects today, encompassing the defense, energy, artificial intelligence, rare earth minerals, and financial sectors.
President Trump announcing that $270 billion in deals are being signed between dozens of companies, thanking those companies for bringing jobs back to American workers. This coming after rolling out the red carpet for Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in a day of pomp and circumstance, which culminated in a black tie dinner at the White House.
This week, our countries also signed groundbreaking agreements on civil nuclear energy, critical minerals, and artificial intelligence. And we're going to be selling Saudi Arabia some of the greatest military equipment ever built, including nearly 300 American-made tanks.
The Saudi prince Tuesday pledging to increase his country's investments in the U.S. from a previously promised $600 billion.
The Crown Prince announced that the number that they'll be investing in the United States is $1 trillion.
And President Trump hailing the U.S.-Saudi strategic partnership, announcing,
we officially designated the kingdom yesterday as the major non-NATO ally. That's a big deal.
President Trump also vows to settle the conflict in Sudan by working out a peace deal at the request of the Saudi Crown Prince.
I just see how important that is to you and to a lot of your friends in the room. Sudan, and we're going to start working on Sudan. I didn't think that that was one that was going to be.
Reporting from the White House, Mari Otsu, NTD News.
Thanks, Mari, for that report. The United States is expanding its AI technology footprint in the Middle East as well, approving the export of tens of thousands of advanced semiconductor chips.
That's right. Elon Musk and NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang yesterday confirmed the development of a 500-megawatt data center in Saudi Arabia. It sounds like a big one. I don't know per se,
like
but
big
it's
deal, yeah.
500 watts.
So yeah, we're doing a XAI and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are doing a
500 megawatts, starting with 50 megawatts phase one, and we're doing it with NVIDIA.
We're also working in Saudi Arabia to build supercomputers to simulate quantum computers and using our computers to be the controller and the error correction, quantum error correction, requires an enormous amount of computation, and so we're doing a lot of great work there too.
The Department of Commerce says it has authorized exporting the equivalent of 35,000 NVIDIA Blackwell AI chips to companies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Those chips will go to the state-run G42 in Abu Dhabi and Humane in Saudi Arabia, both companies planning major data center expansions.
Humane says it intends to buy hundreds of thousands more AI chips as it builds a 500-megawatt facility alongside Elon Musk's xAI. And in the UAE, G42 is planning one of the world's largest data center hubs, built with U.S. and international tech partners.
Meanwhile, Marines in North Carolina got a special visit yesterday. First Lady Melania Trump and Second Lady Usha Vance visited Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune.
NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the trip of the pair, who are showing their gratitude to the troops and the military families ahead of the Thanksgiving Day holiday.
Good afternoon, Camp Lejeune.
First Lady Melania Trump called military families the quiet strength of the nation.
Your love, patience, and courage give our service members the confidence to serve with honor and the comfort of knowing home is always waiting.
Yesterday's trip marks the first time the First and Second Lady traveled together without their husbands since the start of the administration. Trump thanked troops for standing watch so others can celebrate the upcoming Thanksgiving in peace.
This month and every month, America remains grateful for your service, your sacrifice, and your spirit.
Trump and Vance both offered belated birthday wishes to the Marine Corps at large, just over a week after it celebrated its 250th year in service on November 10th. Vice President J.D. Vance served in the Marine Corps before beginning his political career. Second Lady Usha Vance said she was especially excited to be relatively close to Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point, also located in North Carolina, where her husband was once stationed during his time in uniform.
He's told me so many stories about his time in Eastern North Carolina that this feels like home.
Vance says Marines embody boldness in action, unity in purpose, and a lightning readiness to go wherever the nation requires.
We are so grateful to you for carrying on the Marine Corps' proud traditions of duty, honor, and service.
Trump and Vance also visited a high school and elementary school. The pair prepared holiday care packages for troops deployed with the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. The unit deployed to the Caribbean Sea in August and is part of a growing military buildup around Latin America. The unit began joint military training this week with the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. Trinidad and Tobago is situated just a few miles off Venezuela's coastline. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, the House Judiciary Committee examining the rise in violent crime in major U.S. cities and the impact of the Trump administration's deployment of federal forces to try to restore law and order.
Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, brings us more.
After visiting New York City, Philadelphia, and Charlotte, members of the House Judiciary Committee examined the impact of soft-on-crime policies in major U.S. cities.
In August, President Trump deployed all these folks, and what happens when you enforce the law? Crimes went down, safety went up, over 4,000 arrests, and an 11% drop in crime citywide, 11% drop in just a few months.
Democratic lawmakers focused their criticism on federal law enforcement and accused the Trump administration of disregarding court orders and deporting American citizens. Both claims have been debunked.
In Donald Trump's America, you are at increased risk of experiencing militaristic operations in your home, increased risk of being subject to detainment by mass thugs and wannabe vigilantes.
Witness testimony highlighted the need for reform in legislation so that repeat offenders are not released without corrective action.
In Chicago, on average, a shooting or homicide suspect is arrested nearly 12 times. In Oakland, homicide victims and suspects alike have an average of 10 prior arrests. In Baltimore, the number is 9. And right here in Washington, D.C., it's 11.
Research has shown how 1/3 of crime in cities like New York City are perpetrated by the same repeat offenders.
Officers are not lazy, they are overwhelmed. A small fraction of offenders and chronically mentally ill drive much of this disorder. Research suggests that incarcerating or housing just a small fraction of the worst offenders would visibly improve conditions.
The House Administration Committee also examined the Stock Act, a bill that would prohibit lawmakers from trading stocks while being in office. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Thanks, Luis. And a 19-year-old Afghan national in Oklahoma has been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for an ISIS-inspired election day plot. Prosecutors say Abdullah Haji Zada and co-conspirator obtained AK-47 style rifles and 500 rounds of ammunition for the planned attack in November last year.
Zada is a lawful permanent resident, and he pleaded guilty earlier this year and agreed to be removed from the United States after serving his sentence. His co-defendant also pleaded guilty, and he faces up to 35 years in federal prison at sentencing.
Federal prosecutors have charged a Chicago man with committing a terrorist attack for allegedly setting a woman on fire on a Blue Line train. Investigators say 50-year-old Lawrence Reed on Monday night doused a woman with gasoline, chased her through the train, and then set her on fire. Authorities say the victim, a 26-year-old woman, remains hospitalized in critical condition with severe burns. Reed was arrested the next morning, and police said he made incriminating statements about the attack. The ATF special agent in charge said Reed has a long violent criminal history and should not have been free at the time. Prosecutors say the federal charge carries a maximum penalty of life in prison, and if the victim dies, the case could be eligible for the death penalty.
And the Trump administration is continuing to take steps to dismantle the Department of Education, including shifting funding streams to other government departments. Joining us to discuss is Aaron Boxer. Aaron's a former special education teacher and the CEO of Diversified Education Services. Good to see you this morning, Aaron. Thanks for joining. Can you unpack what controls and funds that the Department of Ed has relinquished and in your understanding, why they did so?
Thanks, Carrie. It's great to be here. What's happening is the Federal Department of Education is finally letting go of the programs it was never designed to run in the first place. So we have key K-12 programs, college completion grants, childcare programs, even tribal educations for Native Americans, international programs as well. They're being moved to agencies that actually specialize in those areas, like Department of Labor, HHS, Interior, and also Department of State. And the why is simple. The DOE has become a one-lane choke point. Everything, billions in grants, compliance rules, reimbursements, has to squeeze through this single bureaucracy, and it's failing. And right now we have 1 in 4 eighth graders lacks basic math, 1 in 3 can't read at grade level, even 13%, only 13% are proficient in U.S. history. If a private business delivered those results, it would have been shut down years ago. And we need to be honest, the DOE wasn't created to improve academics. It was a deal with the devil from Jimmy Carter, who created it as a political payoff to the teachers' unions that helped get him elected. The experiment hasn't worked. This restructuring finally returns authority back to the states where education was always meant to be governed.
Yeah, interesting. I want to dive a level deeper on the specifics of changing the funding distribution, because it's not saying funding will go down, correct? It's just saying the method of distributing it down to the local levels will now be carried out still by federal agencies. So how do you see that working in practice?
That's right, Carrie. It makes services faster, more direct, and more specialized. Right now, the money that should go into classrooms gets stuck in Washington paperwork. So moving programs to agencies already handles those issues. It unclogs the system. An example would be workforce-aligned programs belonging in labor, not a federal academic bureaucracy. And then childcare, doesn't it make sense to bring it to HHS, which already has the infrastructure? And then tribal education seems to be coming up a lot. And that belongs in Interior, which already manages these Native American programs already. It doesn't eliminate funding. It removes layers between the funding and the kids. And when the states get resources more quickly, the districts respond quicker and families will finally see the impact. It's going to put money where it matters instead of letting it just die in federal red tape.
Now, Aaron, some of Trump's critics say that his administration's attempts to dismantle the Department of Education, that move would hurt underserved communities. You're painting a little bit of a different picture about getting the money closer to the people who use it. So we're not talking about, in this instance, moving money down to the states or local level. we're talking about just moving it to other departments that have a bit more expertise. But in specific on that criticism that the Department of Ed is best suited to help underserved communities, what do you think there?
I understand the concern, but the truth is underserved communities are already being hurt by the current system. The DOE has had 45 years to close these gaps, and the gaps, they are worse today than when it first opened. If the federal model protected underserved families, we wouldn't have 1 in 3 kids unable to read. We wouldn't have these achievement gaps and chronic absenteeism, or parents pulling their kids out of failing schools in record numbers. The underserved families don't need more bureaucracy in Washington. They need speed, flexibility, and actual options. They need the money. And states can design systems faster, the districts can respond faster, and then when families get more choice, which historically has helped these underserved students, the status quo, right, is the real threat. It's not the reform.
Yeah, and we talked about this, I believe, last week or the week before about Trump looking to do maybe something similar on health care, where you described how decentralization and putting the money into the consumer's hands as opposed to like a layer above at a bureaucratic level will have an immediate free market impact. Do you have any examples of how school choice has created better outcomes, particularly maybe for some of these underserved communities?
Absolutely. We have seen it across the country. When parents can choose the environment that fits their child, several things happen. First of all, achievement improves. That's the number one thing. And charter school networks like Success Academy or BASIS and IDEA routinely, they outperform surrounding districts and who often are serving the same or higher need populations. We have seen that attendance improves. And when families choose the school, the kids show up, and then the chronic absenteeism drops. And then engagement improves. So students behave better. They stay more motivated when they're in a school system that's chosen for them and not assigned to them by their zip code. And then, of course, competition, right? We need competition to improve all schools. When districts know families can leave, they'll stop coasting and start improving. They'll improve their instruction. They'll improve their hiring practices, curriculum quality. So school choice, it's become a hotbed political issue, but it's really not about politics. It's about giving kids a chance when their assigned school is failing them.
Yeah, such a fascinating conversation, and it seems like the ground is shifting under our feet and changes are afoot. Appreciate you breaking it down for us. Aaron Boxer, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
A billionaire activist has thrown his hat into the ring in the race for California's next governor. He joins a list of prominent Democratic candidates to replace Governor Gavin Newsom. NTD's David Lamb has more on the candidate who once ran for president.
California will have a gubernatorial election next year, and a billionaire has entered the race. Philanthropist and businessman Tom Steyer made the announcement on Wednesday.
I'm Tom Steyer. I wanted to build a business here. Now it's worth billions of dollars. And I walked away from it because I wanted to give back to California.
In 1986, Steyer founded Farallon Capital Management, a hedge fund in San Francisco. He ran for president in 2019. The Democratic climate activist joins the California race to replace Gavin Newsom as his term ends next year. The 68-year-old says he promises to make companies pay their fair share and use that money to fund public schools, build homes that families can afford, and lower electric bills by 25% by ending utility monopolies. He also wants to ban corporate political action committee money from state elections. According to Steyer's campaign, he took on the tobacco industry to raise the cigarette tax.
I'm saying we have a broken government. It's been bought by corporations. And my question is, who do you think is going to change that? Sacramento politicians are afraid to change up this system. I'm not. They're going to hate this.
He also led a campaign to impeach President Trump during his first term. Prominent Democratic candidates in California's race include Congresswoman Katie Porter, Javier Becerra, and former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. Republican candidates include Chad Bianco and former Fox News host Steve Hilton. California voters will vote for a new governor in November 2026. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
And President Trump says he'll meet New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani at the White House tomorrow. The meeting comes after a contentious campaign in which Trump backed Mamdani's opponent, Andrew Cuomo, and criticized Mamdani's platform.
Mamdani takes office January 1st. He says his transition team reached out to the White House as part of a commitment he made during the campaign. A spokesperson for Mamdani said he plans to discuss public safety and the city's economic challenges.
Meanwhile, coming up, lawmakers on Capitol Hill warn that U.S. industries are vulnerable as Beijing may again cut off supplies and wage an economic war. Jack Bradley has more on the dangers of China's chokehold on the world's rare earth minerals when we come back.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. I'm Kerry Dunst. Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant, is facing serious allegations of providing tech support to the Chinese military, support that may be used in operations targeting U.S. interests. The company is also accused of sharing sensitive customer data, including IP addresses, payment records, and Wi-Fi details, with the Chinese regime. This is according to a Financial Times report that cites an internal White House memo, and this isn't a first-time event. For Alibaba, U.S. lawmakers have raised alarms, with some urging the Trump administration to take tougher action against the Alibaba group. So what does all this mean for U.S. national security and the broader tech landscape? Well, joining us to break it down is Daniel Cochran. He's a senior research associate at the Heritage Foundation and host of China Insider David Zhang, who brings deep insights into China's tech and geopolitical strategies. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining. Daniel, starting with you, for those unfamiliar with Alibaba, it would be helpful if you could give us its scope in and outside of China, as well as highlight a little bit about these recent allegations, which are quite significant from a national security perspective.
Certainly. Well, Alibaba is one of China's largest tech companies. They provide both cloud services, so similar to Amazon here in the United States. They allow for companies and individuals to essentially host data and also engage in various compute functions via servers that they host. Now, the problem is they're also providing AI tools. They provide significant AI LLMs, and those LLMs are being utilized by the Chinese military against American interests, as the memo highlighted. This is really an interesting development because we've also seen similar things happen with American companies. So specifically, Anthropic here in the United States recently disrupted attempts by Chinese state actors to use their agentic AI Claude against high-level American targets, including financial institutions, chemical companies, even government targets. We also know that TikTok has long been collecting Americans' data, and that companies like Alibaba and TikTok have an obligation under Chinese law to participate with the CCP to target Americans and to profile us. It's a really concerning threat to our national security and our sovereignty.
Yeah, you bring up a couple great points there. And one, obviously, we saw TikTok getting transferred to U.S. ownership, but Alibaba, which about 20% of online shoppers say that they go to Alibaba, so its scale is quite significant in the U.S. And David, of course, Alibaba now has denied these accusations that they have any cooperation with the Chinese military, but in Washington, they're not so convinced. So how deeply integrated, in your understanding, is Alibaba with the Chinese state and their military capacity?
Well, Kerry, it's very interesting because for Alibaba, it's not like somebody in China just goes to their office and demands them to do certain things, but it's a very systematic sort of a pressure and procedure to do so. So from the very beginning, the management behind Alibaba had to grow the company through the influence of the Chinese regime. So they've been sort of tied together in the very beginning. But obviously, there's also data laws and security laws in China that mandates that Chinese companies, especially tech companies, should they require their data, they have to share it with the Chinese government. But also think about what the interest of the Chinese government and its companies really have. It is a total unrestricted warfare against the United States. So financial, cyber, and tech are part of that. And so combining all of this, you really see what's essentially an agenda to compete against American companies, but also at the same time provide something called a civil military fusion, which essentially there's no real distinctions between a civilian company or a military company. So at any given moment, a company in China could be weaponized, especially if it is like somebody like Alibaba that has so much data in its hands from consumers, but also industry leaders alike. And in those sense, you combine everything together. It's really a comprehensive system that's at play.
Yeah, you bring up some very interesting points, particularly around how when you think of warfare, you think of tanks and planes, and that's really not the modern warfare system, and especially with this unrestricted warfare where, potentially cyber attacks, these are all things that could be enabled through these fusions as you described them. Daniel, over to you. What are the legal and then ethical risks for U.S. companies who do want to engage with Chinese tech giants like Alibaba for commercial interests?
The risks have never been higher, both from an ethical and national security standpoint. Look, especially when you're putting your data on their servers, we have this with TikTok too. All that data is stored in servers in China. It's accessible at any time by the companies or the governments. And as David mentioned, there really isn't a separation between the companies and the military. It's all integrated. Every company is a potential weapon of the Chinese Communist Party. And we know that they've been very clear. Their goal is to use the best technologies out there, specifically AI, to perpetrate attacks against American targets. That includes crippling our critical infrastructure. It includes, as an example, hacking systems like the system behind our flights here in the United States, the aircraft here in the United States, that which can really create delays and huge problems for our economy. So we got to understand this sort of the civil military fusion that David mentioned, but we also need to understand that when you put your data in an LLM or in a cloud service hosted by a Chinese company like Alibaba, you're basically just helping the Chinese military create digital profiles to surveil, censor, and control American interests. It's really a concerning development.
Yeah, and as I had alluded to earlier, probably a relief that TikTok is being transferred to U.S. servers. But as you pointed out, they have years and years of that data. But we don't have reciprocity. Obviously, Amazon can't operate inside China, but Alibaba able to do commerce here in the U.S. And David, we know that China has been aggressively pursuing AI and tech innovations. Daniel was talking about those large language models, which really are the underpinnings of how AI functions. So does Alibaba fit into China's broader strategy to advance this technological and military fusion that you had been describing earlier?
Yeah, so really for the average, it's really hard to understand how data can be weaponized. And the key here isn't necessarily tomorrow they're going to come into your front door and demand certain things from you, but it is a building up through these machine learning and now essentially AI functional models that create almost like a strategic plan, assessments, or even a plan of attacks against a certain interest in the United States. For example, it could be the intelligence community. It could be your power grid or infrastructure, water lines. Anything specifically that they can do to cripple the system, to cause fear, and to demand even sort of a ransom out of those attacks, or to simply temporarily shut down certain things can be done. But also with data specifically, this is where it gets really tricky because it's almost like they know more about us than we do about them. And so in warfare, a lot of times it's really about knowing your enemies. But that's also another point where, it could be individuals as well. For example, if you're a local politician, they could formulate a plan to how to better win you over to speak on behalf of the Chinese government instead. Or maybe, it could be certain things like learning about that you have certain debts that they can reach out to help you pay off in exchange for, say, secret intelligence files or whatnot. So there's different ways that they can use data. And so for the average American, they think that, well, we don't have to care about our data being used. Well, in the age of I guess you would call this a cyber warfare or technology warfare, it's a very much of a broad scale attack and plan of collection of information that we should really be worried about. And honestly, a lot of times my fear is that the very data that they're able to be given by the average Americans are in turn used to harm other parts of America in the same way.
Yeah, you're talking about this use of this sensitive data, maybe one data piece in isolation, not that meaningful, but when there's data points that can be triangulated and then use those AI tools to then do things at scale, it can be activated, and it is a vulnerability. To that point, Daniel, with Alibaba's AI capabilities, what security threats do you think it poses to the U.S. specifically?
Yeah, well, actually picking up on David's point, I think it's critical to understand. And as you said, look, you can take with AI, you can take a bunch of seemingly disparate data points and link them together, because AI is fundamentally a pattern recognition technology. It's very good at taking disparate pieces of data and then creating digital profiles, figuring out what your vulnerabilities are, whether it's at an individual level or an institutional or even at a governmental level. And finding those vulnerabilities is of high value to the Chinese. But in addition to that, and going beyond the sort of the pattern recognition and the uncovering of vulnerabilities that AI can provide and is to the Chinese, it's also giving them advanced cyber hacking capabilities. And we know this because the Chinese are using, and I mentioned Anthropic, which is an American company, and they disrupted this attempt, but it was an attempt by Chinese actors to use advanced LLM capabilities to hack basically American critical infrastructure. I believe there was something like over 30 targets. So we know that they're using the AI not just to parse data, but also to perpetrate attacks on our critical infrastructure. So it's sort of that two-part challenge. But I'll add a third element, and we saw this with TikTok. And the reality is that the Chinese still control enormous amounts of our tech stack, other applications like Temu. And we know, for example, that TikTok's algorithm was designed to surface the most toxic content. That is a strategy to rend America's social fabric. So AI in that context, in the context of say AI chatbots, could be used strategically by the Chinese to disrupt America's social fabric. That's just as effective in some way as hacking our critical infrastructure, and it's far more diffuse and harder to combat.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting point about how any division in society, anything that stokes chaos, is in line with the unrestricted warfare that David had been alluding to. But, marketers use this data to try to figure out who they should be their likely converters for, products they're selling. The platforms use this, the social media platforms, to create engagement. So, David, as we start to wrap up, I'd just like to get some understandings of different other use cases that the CCP might be trying to, mix these data sets, consumer data sets, with military objectives, with, sort of PR or publicity type objectives that serve its greater goals.
Right, and Danielle summarized it really well with those three key points. And I just wanted to add on top of that, one additional one I think worth for us to know is market caps, right? Because the more that you see Chinese products, the more that you see Chinese content, the more you see things coming out of China being in, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well, the more reliance you create. When you have reliance, it's a long-term dependence on something that you really cannot get rid of. For example, with the 5G infrastructure or the 4G infrastructures in the United States, it's taking the country a very long time to replace and swap out those equipments. And those equipments, when they're in place, you rely on them for the communications, but also they provide those surveillance capabilities and potentially spying on, say, a key military base nearby. So it just shows you that once you get these things into the system, it takes a long time for them to go away. With the digital fentanyl like TikTok, that goes a step further. It's implanted into a teenager's brain for certain types of algorithm-based content that they like or desire. So it's almost like you're creating a base for relying on things coming out of China that eventually serve a very harmful long-term effect to those in America and other countries as well.
Yeah, if the term digital fentanyl doesn't set off alarm bells, then you really are asleep at the wheel. Such a fascinating and important conversation. Daniel Cochran, David Zhang, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks.
And up ahead, as security at the airports could soon get tighter, the TSA is considering a new rule that could impact your next flight.
And First Lady Melania Trump and Second Lady Usha Vance make a joint rare visit together to a Marine base, thanking soldiers and their families ahead of Thanksgiving. Stay with us for that. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. I'm Carrie Dunst. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. President Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law, ordering the Justice Department to release all unclassified documents related to Jeffrey Epstein within 30 days. The law bars withholding or redacting records for political reasons, though protections remain for the victims, ongoing investigations, as well as sensitive material. Florida Congresswoman Sheila Cherfilis McCormick and 3 others are indicted for allegedly stealing $5 million in FEMA disaster funds in 2021. Prosecutors say the money was tied to COVID-19 vaccination staffing contracts. They allege it was laundered through multiple accounts and then used to support her special election campaign. Officials also allege she routed funds through friends and family as straw donations. Lawmakers are under the microscope for allowing a provision into the government funding bill. This funding bill would allow senators to sue the government for $500,000 after the DOJ secretly searched their phone records. This comes after Republican Senator Chuck Grassley uncovered last month that former special counsel Jack Smith secretly searched phone records from 10 Republican senators. It was in connection to investigating Republicans' claims of 2020 election irregularities. The House has moved to overturn the measure, but right now it's unclear if the Senate will support it, with Senate Leader John Thune saying the new provision would strengthen government accountability. And federal authorities say they've dismantled a major meth pipeline from Mexico into Colorado as part of a 2-year probe that led to 15 indictments and one of the largest meth seizures in state history. And at sea, the U.S. Coast Guard says its crews just offloaded more than 49,000 pounds of cocaine in Florida. It's the biggest haul ever from a single Coast Guard patrol. Those are this morning's top headlines. For that, Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. And the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party is sounding the alarm, saying China's dominance over rare earth minerals has put the U.S. economy and national security at risk. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
When the Chinese government controls critical minerals, it then has the power to dictate what we say and what we do. This is because if we don't do what they want, they can turn off the flow of critical minerals and cripple our industry.
The House Select Committee on the CCP warning about China's monopoly on rare earth minerals. Rare earths are critical from everything for smartphones to fighter jets. And just over a month ago, Beijing cut off rare earth mineral exports entirely, a move that shocked global markets and forced Washington and its allies into emergency talks. And although the U.S. and China agreed to a 1-year trade deal, first off, it's unclear whether that will even hold, as the CCP has broken trade deals with the U.S. before. But if it does hold, lawmakers say the damage is already clear. America is dangerously reliant on the CCP's supply chain.
Once the CCP has killed the competition, they weaponize their monopoly for coercive purposes.
China holds about 90% of the world's rare earth processing, meaning they take raw minerals and turn them into usable products. Beijing got to this point over the last 3 decades by acquiring U.S. companies, flooding markets with subsidized minerals, and driving the remaining mining firms out of business by selling below cost, even willing to lose money to maintain control.
This is no different than the space race. All of the technologies we talked about are in everything in this room. Your blender, your phone, your computer, our defense systems.
Rare earths may be a small upstream industry worth just tens of billions of dollars, but they underpin trillions in downstream economic activity and millions of jobs.
One lawmaker saying factories in her state were impacted by China's export restrictions.
Auto suppliers can't get the magnets required for electric motors. Steel and chemical producers see costs jump overnight. It's the result of a deliberate strategy by the Chinese government to control the supply chains that power the 21st century economy.
The panel recommends rebuilding the domestic supply chain from mining to refining. This year, the Pentagon invested $400 million for a stake in MP Materials, America's only rare earth mine in Mountain Pass, California. And they also warn that unless the U.S. rebuilds now, Beijing will continue using these minerals as geopolitical leverage. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
And thanks to Jack for that report. Ukrainian officials say at least 25 civilians are dead after Russian strikes on multiple apartment buildings. 24 people are still missing.
This all comes as a U.S. delegation is in the Ukraine right now, working on efforts to try to end the war there. We've got our next report from Ariane Pazdar on that.
Ukraine reports at least 25 civilian deaths after a major attack on the western city of Ternopil. At least one person has been saved after being buried alive under the rubble. Ukraine says Russia launched almost 500 drones and 50 missiles at Ukraine overnight. Russia doesn't often attack western Ukraine, as most of the fighting happens in the east, where Ukraine borders Russia. U.S. efforts to broker peace between Moscow and Kiev are once again picking up steam. U.S. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll and Army Chief of Staff General Randy George are meeting Wednesday with Ukrainian officials in Kiev. According to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, the officials are taking part in a fact-finding mission. Ukraine says the U.S. delegation was briefed on Russia's troop buildup, ongoing offensive operations, and missile strikes on residential areas. Ariane Pazdar, NTD News.
Thank you, Ariane. Up ahead, this giving season, a financial advisor shows how to pay it forward in a way that brings meaningful returns for your taxes, your values, and your legacy.
That's right, because whether you're supporting a local food pantry or a national foundation, you can stay tax smart and intentional while you do it. So stay tuned. We're going to have that report just after this.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. Giving season isn't just about good intentions. It's also a moment to take control of your financial future. Whether it's donating cash, stock, or goods, generosity can carry powerful tax advantages that many people don't realize. Joining us for insight is Lawrence Sprung, founder of Midland Financial and the author of Financial Planning Made Personal. Good morning, Lawrence. Good to see you. Some donations are tax deductible, many of them are, but people aren't necessarily aware of what is and isn't and may not be making the most of it. What are the rules there that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that people want to realize is that, these tax deductions are available. And if you make donations to qualified 501c3s, they're often tax deductible. And the rules around it are very simple. You can deduct up to 60% of your adjusted gross income for cash donations. So to public charities where you write a check. But then some other options are you could donate appreciated stock or securities. Those are only capped at 30%, but there's a huge benefit because it allows you personally to avoid the capital gains tax entirely. And then if you end up making donations that exceed your available limit, you could always carry them forward for up to 5 years. So you want to make sure if you're going to be giving this giving season that you're doing it right and you're accounting for it properly.
And what kinds of non-cash donations would you recommend if someone were to want to go down that path?
Yeah, so there are various things that you can do. One of the easiest things, especially with the stock market and investments rising, very quickly over the last 3 years, you could donate stocks, mutual funds, or other appreciated assets that you don't want to get the capital gains hit, because if you donate those, you can avoid the capital gains tax entirely by donating them rather than selling them. And it's really one of the smartest ways that you can support a cause, improve your tax situation, especially in the strong markets that we've seen over the last couple of years.
And talking here about smart donations, there's another aspect to this. You can also donate through your IRA. For some people, that could be a pretty wise choice. What have you got there?
Yeah, so a lot of people who are older, have IRAs, they're being forced to take what's called required minimum distribution. So the government says you're of age that you have to start taking out this amount, and that amount is completely taxable. So if you're taking out that money and you don't necessarily need it, if you're 70 and a half or older, you can transfer up to $108,000 per year. And every year that gets indexed for inflation. So that's the 2025 number. That will go up for 2026. You could transfer that 108 from your IRA to a qualified charity. This strategy is called a qualified charitable distribution. And essentially what it does is it allows you to donate to your charity of choice, lower your required minimum distribution, and it lowers your taxable income while you're in retirement. So it's really like a triple threat.
Yeah, this is all making charitable donations sound very attractive. And of course, it's doing good at the same time. But let's talk about why giving can be so good for the donor as well.
Oh, giving, the old adage used to be give until it hurts. And I think that's changed. And it's really give until it feels good. Give until you feel good. Because studies show that giving boosts your mood, reduces your stress, and even leads to better health outcomes. And, philanthropy really can also strengthen community bonds. And not to mention, if you have children, it shows and helps you set those values for children and reinforce a sense of purpose, especially when you align those causes with things that matter to you personally or to those causes that your family feels very strongly about.
Especially around this time of year, donations really do surge. So for folks who are thinking about it and going ahead and making those kinds of donations, what kinds of records should they be holding on to for tax purposes?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you have those records, because don't forget that paperwork, because the IRS will ask you for it in the case of an audit or they want to check things out. So if you're making those cash donations and they're under $250, a bank record or a receipt is really enough. If you're making a cash donation over $250, you need a written acknowledgement from the charity. So you really want a letter acknowledging that you made this contribution. Now, if you donate goods that are worth more than $500, you clean out the closet, you get rid of your clothes, and you drop them off at the local shelter. For those over $500, you have to file a special form in 8283. And for donations over $5,000, you may need an appraisal. So bottom line is, keep this documentation, keep everything for at least 3 years in case there is an audit.
Very wise. Great advice. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Lawrence Sprung, good to see you as always.
Thank you.
And as Lawrence mentions, 501c3s, it's tax deductible, and NTD is a 501c3.
There you go.
If you enjoy watching our program, you can go to donate.ntd.com. We appreciate your support, and we love to bring you the truthful and accurate news without any bias. So,
what you need to know.
And if you have any feedback on our show, or you have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at goodmorning@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. I'm Carrie Dunst.
I'm Stephanie Cox. Have a good day.